Sheriff Deputy Jake Morrison's radio crackled mid-sentence as he approached the rusted yellow school bus, his hand freezing on his weapon when he saw what waited inside. Thunder, all some 200 pounds of black and rust-red Brahman bull, knelt like a heartbroken child beside his owner, massive tears streaming down his weathered face as he refused to budge from Marcus Thompson's trembling side. The sight that should have been impossible stopped 3 armed officers cold in their tracks. Eleanor Martinez gasped from behind the police tape, her weathered hands flying to her mouth as she watched the giant bull gently nuzzle the sobbing veteran who'd lost everything. Children pressed against car windows, their drawings of the nice bull crumpled in small fists. "Dear God," Morrison whispered, lowering his radio. "That bull, he's actually crying." What could make a creature that powerful weep like a human child? And why was he protecting a man the whole county called crazy? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Thompson had once been the kind of man who could steady a helicopter in a sandstorm and save 3 lives before breakfast. At 52, his lean frame still carried the disciplined posture of 23 years in the Army, though silver now threaded through his close-cropped brown hair like premature frost. His steady blue eyes had seen things that would break lesser men, but they hadn't broken him, not completely. The tremor in his hands, a constant reminder of that final IED blast in Afghanistan, was the only outward sign of the war that still raged inside his head. Thunder stood beside him now, all 4 tons of muscle and bone, yet gentle as a lamb with the man who'd pulled him from the floodwaters of Hurricane Harvey 4 years ago. The Brahman bull's distinctive black coat, marked with patches of rust red like ancient armor, gleamed in the Texas sun. His intelligent brown eyes seemed to hold depths of understanding that unsettled strangers and comforted Marcus in ways no human ever could. At 4 years old, Thunder had grown from a drowning calf into a giant who could move a fallen tree with his horns or open a gate with the precision of a surgeon. Their home, if you could call it that, sat in the middle of 40 acres of scrubland that had once belonged to Marcus's grandfather. The 1970s school bus, painted a faded yellow that was now more rust than color, looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie. Most of its windows were spider-webbed with cracks, and vines had begun their slow conquest of the metal sides. Inside, Marcus had managed to make it barely livable with a small wood-burning stove, a cot that had seen better decades, and Thunder's custom-built stall that took up nearly half the bus. The children who'd once filled those seats were grown now, scattered to lives that no longer included their father. Sarah Thompson, 28 and exhausted from her shifts as an ICU nurse at Houston Methodist, visited when guilt overcame her fear of seeing her father's decline. Her younger brother David, 25 and climbing the corporate ladder in Dallas, came even less frequently, each visit shorter than the last as his discomfort with Thunder grew. Their mother, Linda, had tried to love Marcus through 2 tours of duty and 18 months of bureaucratic hell with the VA. But loving a ghost, she'd told him the day she left, was like trying to hold smoke. "You never came home, Marcus," she'd whispered, packing her bags while Thunder watched from the doorway. "Your body did, but you stayed in that desert with all those boys who didn't make it." Now, as Thunder pressed his massive head against Marcus's shoulder and made that low rumbling sound that wasn't quite a moo but something deeper, more human, Marcus wondered if Linda had been right. Maybe he was a ghost. But if that was true, then Thunder was the only one who could see him clearly, love him anyway, and remind him daily that some hearts beat strong enough for 2. The final eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning that dawned gray and humid, typical for East Texas in late September. Marcus found it wedged between the bus door and frame, the official seal of Brazos County staring up at him like an accusation. His hand shook as he unfolded the document, not from his usual tremor, but from the cold realization that he had 72 hours to vacate premises he didn't even own anymore. Thunder sensed the shift immediately. The massive bull lifted his head from where he'd been grazing, nostrils flaring as he caught the scent of his human's distress. In 4 years together, Thunder had learned to read Marcus's moods like weather patterns, and this felt like a hurricane approaching. He ambled over with surprising grace for an animal his size, pressing his warm flank against Marcus's back as the veteran sank onto the bus steps. "We're done, boy," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the morning breeze rustling through the mesquite trees. "Lost the house 6 months ago, been living on borrowed time ever since. Now we ain't even got that." The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd survived 2 deployments in Afghanistan, pulled 3 soldiers from a burning Humvee, and earned commendations he'd never bothered to frame. But he couldn't survive the maze of paperwork and bureaucratic indifference that was the Department of Veterans Affairs. 18 months his disability claim had been under review. 18 months of forms and appointments and phone calls that led nowhere except to more forms and appointments and phone calls. Thunder lowered his massive head and gently bumped Marcus's shoulder, a gesture so human-like it never failed to surprise people who witnessed it. The bull had developed this habit during Marcus's worst PTSD episodes, when the flashbacks would hit like sledgehammers and leave him gasping on the ground. Thunder would position himself as a living shield, his bulk blocking out the world until the storm in Marcus's head passed. The morning Marcus had found Thunder, the bull had been barely 6 months old, trapped on a piece of high ground as Hurricane Harvey's floodwaters rose around him. The rest of the herd had already drowned, their bodies floating like dark islands in the muddy current. Marcus had waded chest-deep through the flood, fighting the current and his own exhaustion to reach the terrified calf. When he'd finally managed to get a rope around Thunder's neck, the young bull had looked at him with those impossibly expressive eyes and seemed to whisper a promise. "I'll remember this." Now, 4 years later, Thunder had grown into a magnificent specimen of his breed. At 1,200 pounds, he was pure muscle and bone wrapped in a coat that gleamed like polished obsidian in the sunlight. But it was his temperament that defied everything people thought they knew about Brahman bulls. Where his breed was known for being temperamental and aggressive, Thunder moved through the world with the gentle patience of a therapy dog. He'd never shown aggression toward a human, not even during his adolescence when hormones should have made him unpredictable. The neighbors, however, didn't see gentleness when they looked at Thunder. They saw nearly 3/4 of a ton of beef with horns, and the sight made them nervous. Ellen Watkins, who lived in the trailer closest to Marcus's property line, had made it her personal mission to complain about Thunder to anyone who would listen. "That thing's gonna kill somebody," she'd tell anyone at the Piggly Wiggly who'd stand still long enough. Mark my words, we'll all be reading about it in the paper. It was Ellen who'd made the calls to animal control, Ellen who'd started the petition to have Thunder removed as a public menace, and Ellen who'd finally convinced the county that Marcus Thompson and his bull were more trouble than they were worth. The eviction notice in Marcus's hands was the culmination of her 18-month campaign to rid the neighborhood of what she saw as a ticking time bomb. Marcus looked at Thunder, who was now methodically working his way through a patch of Johnson grass near the bus. The bull's tail swished contentedly as he grazed, occasionally lifting his head to check on Marcus with those impossibly intelligent eyes. In a world that had systematically stripped away everything Marcus had ever valued, his career, his marriage, his home, his sense of purpose, Thunder remained constant, loyal, unquestioning in his devotion. "What do you say, boy?" Marcus asked, folding the eviction notice and tucking it into his shirt pocket. Ready to become homeless wanderers? Thunder looked up from his grazing and made that low rumbling sound that wasn't quite a moo but something deeper, more conversational. To Marcus, it sounded distinctly like agreement, as if the bull was saying, "Wherever you go, I go." The decision, when it came, felt inevitable. Marcus had nowhere else to turn, no one else to call. His children had their own lives, their own problems, their own embarrassment about their father who talked to a bull like it was people. His ex-wife had moved on to someone whose demons were quieter, more manageable. But he had Thunder, and Thunder had him. And sometimes that had to be enough. The abandoned Thompson family property sat 23 miles east of town, accessible only by a gravel road that hadn't seen maintenance since Marcus's grandfather died 15 years ago. Weeds had reclaimed most of the 40 acres, creating a sea of green that rippled in the constant Texas wind. The old farmhouse had burned down a decade earlier, teenage vandals, the fire chief had said, leaving only a concrete foundation and a brick chimney pointing accusingly at the sky like a broken finger. But the school bus was still there. Marcus remembered it from his childhood visits, when Grandpa Earl had used it as a storage shed for farm equipment. The old man had bought it from the school district in 1975 for $50 and a promise to haul it away. For 30 years it had sat in the middle of what used to be a pasture, slowly succumbing to rust and the patient invasion of honeysuckle vines. Now, as Marcus's pickup truck crunched to a stop beside it, the bus looked like something from a post-apocalyptic nightmare. The yellow paint had faded to the color of old bones, and rust wept down its sides in orange tears. Most of the windows were either cracked or missing entirely, their jagged edges catching the afternoon light like broken teeth. Vines had wrapped around the entire structure, creating an organic cage that made the bus look more like a piece of modern art than a potential shelter. Thunder emerged from the truck bed with surprising grace for an animal his size, his hooves hitting the ground with dull thuds that seemed to echo across the empty landscape. He stood perfectly still for a moment, his massive head turning slowly as he surveyed their new domain. His nostrils flared as he tested the air, cataloging scents and sounds that meant nothing to Marcus but apparently told Thunder everything he needed to know about this place. "Well, boy," Marcus said, shouldering his duffel bag and looking at the derelict bus, "it ain't much, but it's what we got." The bus door hung half open, twisted on its hinges and held in place by the persistence of rust and gravity. Marcus had to put his full weight behind it to force it open wide enough to enter, the metal shrieking in protest like a wounded animal. The sound sent a family of sparrows exploding from the honeysuckle in a panic of wings and chirping. Inside was worse than he'd expected. The bench seats had been stripped out years ago, leaving only the metal brackets bolted to the floor. The rubber floor covering had rotted away in patches, exposing the plywood beneath, which had warped and buckled from years of moisture infiltration. Graffiti covered the walls, mostly the work of teenagers who'd discovered this isolated place over the years. Jason plus Tiffany forever was spray-painted in red letters near the driver's seat, and Marcus wondered idly if Jason and Tiffany had made it, or if their love had proved as temporary as everything else in this world. The ceiling leaked in at least 6 places, evidenced by the water stains and the small forest of mushrooms growing in the dampest corners. A family of mice had taken up residence in what used to be the engine compartment, and their droppings covered every horizontal surface like tiny black seeds of despair. Thunder appeared in the doorway, or rather, he tried to appear. His massive frame was too wide for the opening, and after several attempts to squeeze inside, he gave up and simply stood with his head and neck extended into the bus, surveying their new home with what Marcus could only describe as bovine concern. "Yeah, I know," Marcus said, running his hand along Thunder's broad forehead. "It ain't the Ritz, but we'll make it work." That first night was the longest either of them had experienced in years. Marcus managed to clear enough space to unroll his sleeping bag on one of the less damaged sections of floor, using his duffel bag as a pillow and his jacket as additional insulation against the September chill that crept through the broken windows. Thunder, unable to fit inside, positioned himself directly outside the door, his massive bulk serving as both guardian and windbreak. Around midnight, the nightmares came. Marcus was back in the desert, back in that moment when the world exploded in fire and sand and the screams of men who would never see home again. The IED had been buried in a pothole, invisible until the moment it tore through their convoy like the fist of an angry god. Marcus had been the medic, trained to save lives, equipped with everything he needed to patch up wounded soldiers and send them home to their families, but there hadn't been enough left to save. He jerked awake with a strangled cry, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The unfamiliar surroundings of the bus disoriented him momentarily. Where was he? What was that sound? Until Thunder's low, reassuring rumble penetrated the fog of terror that still clung to his mind. The bull had somehow managed to get his head and most of his neck through the doorway, and he was making that sound he made when Marcus was upset, that deep humming that seemed to come from the very center of his massive chest. Thunder's warm breath ghosted across Marcus's face as the bull gently nuzzled his cheek, and gradually Marcus's heartbeat began to slow. "I'm okay, boy," Marcus whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just the usual ghosts." Thunder didn't move away. He stayed there, half in and half out of the bus, his presence a warm, solid anchor in the cold reality of their new existence. Every time Marcus started to drift back towards sleep, Thunder would shift slightly, making just enough noise to keep the nightmares at bay without fully waking his human. By morning, Marcus had managed perhaps 3 hours of actual sleep, but it was 3 hours more than he would have gotten alone. As the sun rose over the scrubland, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful under different circumstances, Marcus sat on the bus steps and surveyed their domain. 40 acres of nobody caring what they did or who they were. 40 acres where a man could rebuild himself from scratch if he had the will and the right partner. Thunder stood nearby, already grazing on the tall grass, his tail swishing contentedly as if this abandoned patch of Texas was exactly where he'd always wanted to be. Maybe it was. The discovery came on the third morning while Marcus was attempting to make coffee over a camp stove that kept threatening to blow out in the persistent Texas wind. Thunder had wandered to the rear of the bus and begun that peculiar behavior he exhibited when something didn't smell right. Head lowered, nostrils flaring, pawing at the ground with one massive hoof. "What you got there, boy?" Marcus asked, abandoning his coffee to investigate. Thunder was focused on a section of the bus's exterior wall where the rust had eaten through the metal completely, creating a hole about the size of a dinner plate. The bull kept pushing his nose toward the opening, then looking back at Marcus with an expression that clearly said, "You need to see this." Marcus knelt beside the hole and peered inside. At first he saw only darkness and the familiar smell of decay that permeated the entire vehicle. But as his eyes adjusted, he could make out something that shouldn't have been there. A wooden box wrapped in what looked like oilcloth, tucked into the space between the outer wall and the interior paneling. It took 20 minutes of careful work with a tire iron to create an opening large enough to extract the box. Thunder supervised the entire operation, occasionally nudging Marcus's shoulder when the man's hands shook too badly to maintain his grip on the tools. The box, when it finally came free, was heavier than expected, solid oak with dovetail joints that spoke of real craftsmanship. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had protected it from decades of moisture, was his grandfather's journal. The leather cover was worn smooth by years of handling, and Earl Thompson's name was embossed on the front in letters that had once been gold but now showed only the faintest trace of their former glory. Marcus opened it with hands that trembled for reasons that had nothing to do with his usual condition. The first entry was dated September 15, 1952. A man ain't defined by what he owns or what he's given, but by what he builds with his own two hands. Every piece of wood has a story to tell, and it's a carpenter's job to listen close and give it a new voice. Page after page revealed the philosophy of a man who had understood something fundamental about the relationship between work and healing. Earl Thompson had been a carpenter by trade, a builder of homes and hopes, and his journal was filled with observations about life that read like scripture to his grandson. October 3, 1953, fix the Hendersons' porch today. Widow Henderson cried when I finished, said it was the first time since her Henry passed that she felt like her house was whole again. Sometimes we don't just repair wood and nails. Sometimes we repair hearts. Marcus read until his eyes burned, thunder lying beside him in the afternoon shade cast by the bus. Each entry was a window into a world where purpose was clear and satisfaction came from creation rather than destruction. His grandfather had lived through the Depression, served in World War II, and come home to build a life that mattered. Every fence post, every barn beam, every carefully fitted joint was an act of defiance against the chaos of the world. December 12, 1954. Young folks today think happiness is something that happens to you, like rain or sunshine. They got it backwards. Happiness is something you build, board by board, nail by nail. Some days the wood is straight and true, some days it's warped and full of knots, but you keep building, because the alternative is having no shelter at all. The journal's final entry was dated 2 weeks before Earl Thompson's death. Left this bus here for whoever might need it someday. It ain't much to look at, but it's got good bones. Sometimes that's all a man needs to start over. Good bones and the will to do the work. Thunder seemed to sense the shift in Marcus's mood. The bull rose from where he'd been resting and walked to the front of the bus, where he began examining the door mechanism with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for Marcus's emotional state. After several minutes of investigation, Thunder positioned his head just so and gave the door a gentle push with his horn. It swung open easily for the first time since they'd arrived. "Well, I'll be damned," Marcus muttered, looking from the journal to his unlikely partner. "You trying to tell me something, boy?" Thunder looked back at him with those impossibly expressive eyes and made that low rumbling sound that Marcus had learned to interpret as agreement. The bull then walked to where Marcus kept his tools, a small collection of wrenches and screwdrivers inherited from various apartments and jobs, and gently picked up a hammer in his mouth. The symbolism was not lost on Marcus. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes we don't just repair wood and nails. Sometimes we repair hearts. The work began the next morning. Marcus started small, telling himself he was just making the bus more livable. Nothing grand or ambitious. He patched the worst of the holes in the floor with salvaged plywood, replaced the broken windows with sheets of clear plastic, and rigged a better ventilation system for the wood stove. Thunder proved to be an invaluable assistant, his strength making quick work of tasks that would have been impossible for Marcus alone. The bull seemed to understand the concept of construction work instinctively. When Marcus needed a piece of lumber moved, Thunder would position himself to help lift and carry. When a section of wall needed to be held in place while Marcus secured it, Thunder would brace it with his massive shoulder. Most remarkably, the bull seemed to anticipate what Marcus would need next, often moving tools or materials into position before being asked. Word of their project began to spread through the small community of neighbors who lived along the gravel roads that crisscrossed this part of Brazos County. Eleanor Martinez was the first to visit, bringing homemade tamales and an old thermos of coffee that was still hot, despite the 20-minute drive from her house. Eleanor was 73, a widow who had lived alone since her husband Roberto died 5 years earlier. She had the kind of weathered beauty that spoke of a lifetime spent working in the Texas sun, and her eyes held a sharpness that missed nothing. She surveyed the work Marcus and Thunder had accomplished in just 1 week and nodded approvingly. "That bull of yours is something special," she said, watching Thunder carefully position a sheet of plywood where Marcus could reach it easily. "Roberto always said animals know things we don't. Thunder there, he knows you need this project." "It's just repairs," Marcus said, though they both knew it was more than that. "Mijo," Eleanor said, using the Spanish endearment that came naturally to her after 50 years of mothering everyone in the neighborhood. "Repairs is just another word for healing. You're fixing more than this old bus." She was right, though Marcus couldn't have articulated it at the time. Each day brought new challenges and small victories. The electrical system required complete rewiring, a task that should have been beyond Marcus's capabilities but somehow felt manageable when broken down into individual circuits and connections. Thunder proved adept at running wire through tight spaces, his horn serving as an unlikely but effective tool for threading cables through the bus's framework. The transformation was gradual but undeniable. What had been a derelict shell began to take on the characteristics of an actual home. Marcus built custom cabinets from salvaged lumber, their dimensions dictated by the bus's unique proportions, but their quality reflecting the standards his grandfather had written about in the journal. Thunder's presence influenced every decision. Doorways were widened to accommodate the bull's massive frame, floors were reinforced to support his weight, and the layout was designed around the reality that this would be a home shared by man and beast. The neighbors began to take notice. Frank Chen, who lived in the modular home closest to the main road, stopped by one afternoon with a 6-pack of beer and an offer to help with the plumbing. He was a retired pipe fitter who had moved to East Texas to escape the humidity of Houston, and he possessed the kind of practical knowledge that Marcus desperately needed. "This is good work," Frank said, running his hand along one of Marcus's cabinet doors. "Your granddaddy teach you carpentry?" "In a way," Marcus replied, thinking of the journal's influence on every decision he made. "He left me his tools and his philosophy." Frank nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Sometimes that's all we need, the tools and the knowledge that somebody before us figured it out. Thunder seemed to approve of Frank, allowing the older man to scratch behind his ears while they discussed the intricacies of running water lines in a vehicle that had never been designed for permanent habitation. The bull's acceptance was important to Marcus. Thunder's judgment of people had proven uncannily accurate over the years. As the weeks passed, the bus project became something larger than Marcus had intended. It became a daily routine that gave structure to his days, a purpose that got him out of bed each morning despite the nightmares that still visited most nights. Thunder's presence made the work not just bearable but enjoyable, transforming what could have been a lonely struggle into something approaching companionship. The bull's intelligence continued to surprise everyone who witnessed it. Thunder had learned to operate the simple latch on the toolbox, retrieving specific tools when Marcus called for them by name. He could distinguish between different types of screws and bolts, sorting hardware with his tongue in a way that seemed impossible but proved remarkably effective. Most importantly, Thunder seemed to sense when Marcus's PTSD symptoms were building toward a crisis, positioning himself as a calming presence before the attacks fully manifested. Doc. Rebecca Martinez, Eleanor's daughter-in-law and a veterinarian who specialized in large animals, stopped by one evening to check on Thunder's health. She was a small woman with intelligent eyes and gentle hands, and Thunder submitted to her examination with the patience of a well-trained patient. "I've never seen anything like this," she told Marcus after completing her assessment. "Thunder's completely healthy, but his behavior around you is extraordinary. He's reading your emotional state and responding appropriately. It's the kind of sensitivity you usually see in therapy dogs, but in a 1,200-pound bull." "He's always been special," Marcus said, scratching Thunder's forehead while the bull leaned into the contact like an oversized cat. "Have you considered getting him certified as an emotional support animal?" Dr. Martinez asked. "Texas law is pretty clear about the rights of people who need animal assistance, even for PTSD. Marcus had never considered the possibility. Thunder had simply been his companion, his friend, his family. The idea that their relationship might have legal protection was both intriguing and slightly uncomfortable. It suggested a level of dependency that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to acknowledge, even to himself. But as he watched Thunder methodically organize the scattered tools in the exact order Marcus preferred them, he had to admit that Dr. Martinez was right. This wasn't just friendship or even loyalty. This was something deeper, more complex, and more necessary than he had ever imagined possible between man and beast. That night, as Thunder positioned himself outside the bus to keep watch over their shared domain, Marcus sat in his nearly completed home and read another entry from his grandfather's journal. "Sometimes the best partnerships ain't between people. Sometimes they're between a man and his work, or a woman and her garden, or a child and a dream. The important thing ain't what you're partnered with, but whether that partnership makes you better than you were alone." Looking around at the warm, functional space they had created together, Marcus had to admit that Thunder had made him better than he had been alone. The bull had given him purpose, structure, and hope. In return, Marcus had given Thunder shelter, care, and the kind of devotion that transcended species. It was, he realized, the best partnership he had ever known. The first sign of trouble came with the sound of expensive tires crunching over gravel at precisely 9:30 on a Thursday morning. Marcus looked up from where he was installing the final cabinet hinges, his hands automatically stilling at the unfamiliar engine note. Thunder, who had been dozing in a patch of morning sunlight, lifted his massive head and turned toward the approaching vehicle with the alert attention he reserved for potential threats. The black SUV that emerged from the dust cloud bore the official seal of Brazos County, and the man who stepped out wore the kind of cheap suit that screamed government bureaucrat. Clayton Whitmore was 49 years old, thin as a fence post, with the pallid complexion of someone who spent his days under fluorescent lights reviewing other people's misery. His eyes, pale blue and calculating, swept over the transformed bus with the expression of someone finding exactly what he'd hoped not to find. "Mr. Thompson," Clayton said, his voice carrying the flat authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I'm Clayton Whitmore from the VA Disability Office. I understand you've been living here with a dangerous animal." Thunder rose to his feet with fluid grace, positioning himself between Clayton and Marcus. The bull's posture wasn't aggressive, but it was unmistakably protective, his dark eyes fixed on the stranger with an intelligence that made Clayton visibly uncomfortable. "Thunder's not dangerous," Marcus said, setting down his tools and wiping his hands on an old shop rag. "He's been with me 4 years, never hurt anybody." "That's not what the reports say," Clayton replied, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be an extensive file. Multiple complaints from neighbors about threatening behavior, property damage, public safety concerns, and frankly, Mr. Thompson, living in these conditions doesn't exactly support your claim for disability benefits. The threat was subtle but clear. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as the implications sank in. Clayton wasn't just here about Thunder. He was here to sabotage the VA claim that had been pending for 18 months, the claim that represented Marcus's only hope for financial stability. "These aren't bad conditions," Marcus said, gesturing at the bus that had become his home. "I've put a lot of work into making this place livable." Clayton's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Mr. Thompson, you're living in a converted school bus with a bull. No reasonable person would consider this acceptable housing for someone seeking disability compensation. It suggests either that your claimed disabilities don't actually prevent you from working, or that you're making choices that indicate mental instability." Thunder took a step closer to Clayton, not threatening but clearly unhappy with the man's tone. The bull's ears were forward, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air. Animals, Marcus had learned, were excellent judges of character, and Thunder's judgment of Clayton was obviously negative. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to restrain that animal," Clayton said, taking a step backward despite Thunder's non-aggressive posture. "Bulls are inherently dangerous regardless of training." "He's not restrained because he doesn't need to be," Marcus replied. "Thunder's never shown aggression toward anyone." "That you know of," Clayton said, making notes on his tablet. "But Brahman bulls are unpredictable. They're bred for size and strength, not temperament. One bad day, one moment of confusion or territorial behavior, and someone could be seriously injured or killed." As if summoned by the conversation, Eleanor Martinez's old Ford pickup appeared at the end of the drive. She climbed out with the careful dignity of someone whose joints weren't quite what they used to be, carrying a covered dish that smelled like heaven even from 50 yards away. "Morning, Marcus," she called, then noticed Clayton and the official vehicle. Her expression shifted from friendly to wary in the space of a heartbeat. "We got company?" "This is Clayton Whitmore from the VA," Marcus said. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Eleanor Martinez. She lives down the road." Clayton's eyes sharpened with interest. "Mrs. Martinez, have you had any concerns about Mr. Thompson's bull? Any incidents or threatening behavior?" Eleanor looked at Clayton as if he'd just asked whether water was wet. "Threatening behavior? From Thunder?" She walked directly to the bull, who lowered his massive head so she could scratch behind his ears. "Honey, this bull's got better manners than most people. Last week he helped me get my groceries out of the truck when my arthritis was acting up. Picked up the bags gentle as you please and carried them to my porch." "Ma'am, that's exactly the kind of behavior that concerns us," Clayton said. "Animals that interact with humans outside their normal behavioral patterns can be unpredictable. Today he's helpful. Tomorrow he might decide someone is a threat." Eleanor's eyes flashed with the kind of anger that 73 years of life had taught her to wield efficiently. "Young man, I've been around bulls my whole life. My Roberto raised cattle for 40 years, and I can tell you that Thunder here is the gentlest creature you'll ever meet. If you're looking for threats, you might want to examine your own behavior instead of his." Thunder, as if to punctuate Eleanor's point, gently nuzzled the covered dish in her hands. She laughed and pulled back the aluminum foil to reveal fresh tortillas. "See? He knows I brought his favorites." Clayton made more notes, his expression growing darker. "Mrs. Martinez, I appreciate your perspective, but individual anecdotes don't override safety protocols. The fact remains that Mr. Thompson is living in substandard conditions with a potentially dangerous animal, and this raises serious questions about his fitness to receive disability benefits." "Substandard?" Eleanor looked around at the transformed bus, taking in the quality of Marcus's carpentry work, the neat organization of tools and supplies, the obvious care that had gone into every detail. "Son, this is better than half the apartments I've seen in town. Marcus has built himself a real home here." "It's a bus, ma'am," Clayton said with the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child. "Regardless of improvements, it's not a permanent residence. It's the kind of temporary arrangement that suggests either that Mr. Thompson doesn't actually need the level of support he's claiming, or that he's making choices that indicate impaired judgment. Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded his worst episodes. The combination of confrontation and bureaucratic doublespeak was triggering responses he'd thought he had under control. His hands began to shake, and his breathing became shallow and rapid. Thunder noticed immediately. The bull abandoned Eleanor's attention and moved to Marcus's side, pressing his warm flank against the man's legs. The contact was grounding, reassuring, and Marcus felt his panic response begin to subside. Clayton watched this interaction with obvious disdain. "And this is another concern," he said, making more notes. "Using an animal as an emotional crutch rather than seeking proper medical treatment. It's an avoidance behavior that suggests the claimant isn't taking his condition seriously." "Emotional crutch?" Eleanor's voice rose to a pitch that could have cut glass. "That bull just stopped a panic attack better than any pill or therapy session could have. You think that's a crutch? That's a miracle." "It's enabling behavior," Clayton replied coolly. "Mr. Thompson needs to learn to manage his symptoms through proper channels, not by relying on an animal." "Proper channels like the VA office that's been ignoring his claim for 18 months?" Eleanor shot back. "Proper channels like the appointment system that makes you wait 3 months to see a doctor for 5 minutes? That kind of proper?" Clayton's jaw tightened. "The VA processes claims according to established procedures designed to ensure fairness and accuracy. If Mr. Thompson's claim is taking time to process, it's because we're being thorough." "You're being thorough, all right," Eleanor said. "Thoroughly unhelpful." Marcus found his voice again, Thunder's presence having restored enough calm for him to speak coherently. "Mr. Whitmore, what exactly do you want from me?" "I want you to make responsible choices," Clayton replied. "Find proper housing, seek appropriate medical treatment, and remove the safety hazard you've created by keeping a dangerous animal. Do those things, and we can continue processing your claim. Refuse, and I'll have to recommend denial based on non-compliance with treatment recommendations and unsafe living conditions." "Treatment recommendations that nobody ever made," Marcus pointed out. "Housing I can't afford without the benefits you won't approve. It's a catch-22. "It's the system," Clayton said with a shrug. "My job isn't to make it easy. It's to make sure benefits go to people who actually need them and are making good faith efforts to improve their situations." Thunder, who had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention he usually reserved for Marcus's emotional state, suddenly lifted his head and looked directly at Clayton. The bull's expression was impossible to read, but something in his posture suggested he had taken the measure of this man and found him wanting. "Mr. Whitmore," Eleanor said, her voice now deadly calm, "I think it's time for you to leave." "Ma'am, I'm conducting official business on private property with a man who's answered your questions and shown you nothing but courtesy. You've seen what you came to see, made your little notes, and delivered your threats. Time to go." Clayton looked from Eleanor to Marcus to Thunder, as if calculating the wisdom of prolonging the confrontation. Thunder took a single step forward, not threatening but clearly supporting Eleanor's suggestion that the visit was over. "This isn't finished, Mr. Thompson," Clayton said, closing his tablet and heading back toward his SUV. "You have 30 days to bring your living situation into compliance with VA standards. After that, I'll be recommending denial of your claim." The black SUV disappeared in another cloud of dust, leaving Marcus and Eleanor standing in the sudden quiet of the morning. Thunder remained alert until the sound of the engine faded completely, then relaxed with a sigh that sounded remarkably human. "That man's got a stick up his ass the size of a telephone pole," Eleanor said, her language colorful enough to make Marcus smile despite his worry. "He's got the power to destroy my life," Marcus replied quietly. He's got the power to try, Eleanor corrected. But honey, you've got something he doesn't understand. You've got thunder, and you've got people who care about you. And you've got the kind of determination that builds something beautiful out of nothing but rust and hope. She was right, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Clayton Whitmore represented more than just bureaucratic obstinacy. There had been something personal in the man's hostility, something that went beyond normal professional duty. Thunder pressed against his leg again, offering wordless comfort, and Marcus realized that whatever came next, he wouldn't face it alone. The transformation of Marcus's situation from hope to desperation happened with the systematic precision of a military operation, which, given Clayton Whitmore's apparent vendetta, seemed grimly appropriate. Over the following 3 weeks, a cascade of official notices arrived with clockwork regularity, each one tightening the bureaucratic noose around Marcus and Thunder's neck. First came the animal control citation, delivered by a nervous deputy who kept his hand on his pepper spray, despite Thunder's obvious docility. The bull was declared a public health hazard, based on complaints from concerned citizens, though Marcus suspected there was only one citizen doing the complaining, and she lived in the trailer with the pink flamingos and the permanent scowl. Then came the building code violations. According to Brazos County, the converted school bus failed to meet minimum standards for human habitation. Never mind that Marcus had installed proper plumbing, electrical systems that would have passed inspection in any residential structure, and insulation that kept the interior more comfortable than most apartments he'd rented. The county inspector, a weary man named Rodriguez, who clearly hated his job, apologized as he tagged the bus with violation notices. "Look, Thompson," Rodriguez said quietly while Thunder watched from a respectful distance, "this is the cleanest, most professional conversion I've ever seen. Hell, my daughter would love to live in something this nice when she goes off to college, but I got orders from above to cite every possible violation, and technically this vehicle isn't zoned for residential use." "Who gave those orders?" Marcus asked, though he already suspected the answer. Rodriguez glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. "Word is, someone with pull at the VA office made some calls. Said there was a safety issue that needed immediate attention." The health department came next, ostensibly to investigate unsanitary conditions created by livestock in close proximity to human habitation. The inspector, a brisk woman with severe glasses and a clipboard full of forms, seemed genuinely surprised to find Thunder's living area cleaner than many commercial stables she'd inspected. But she dutifully photographed everything, measured the distance between Thunder's water trough and Marcus's kitchen area, and left with the promise that a full report would be filed within 10 business days. Sarah arrived on a Tuesday afternoon driving her Honda with the grim determination of someone preparing for an intervention. She'd called ahead, which was unusual. Sarah typically dropped by unannounced, as if hoping to catch her father in some compromising situation that would justify her concerns. This time she climbed out of her car with the measured pace of someone who'd rehearsed what she was going to say. Thunder, who had always liked Sarah despite her obvious discomfort around him, ambled over to greet her with his usual gentle enthusiasm. She allowed him to nuzzle her hand, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself ready to flee if the massive bull made any sudden movements. "Dad, we need to talk," she said without preamble. "Always do," Marcus replied, setting down the book he'd been reading. Another entry from his grandfather's journal that he'd found tucked between the pages. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "This whole situation," Sarah said, gesturing at the bus, at Thunder, at the life Marcus had built for himself. "It's getting out of hand. David called me yesterday, said people at his office are making jokes about his dad who lives with a bull." "And Linda, your mother called you?" Marcus felt a familiar ache at the mention of his ex-wife. They hadn't spoken since the divorce papers were signed 2 years ago. "She's worried about you. We all are. Dad, You're living in a school bus with a 1,200-pound animal? That's not normal. That's not healthy. Thunder, as if sensing the rising tension, moved closer to Marcus and settled himself between father and daughter. The bull's presence was calming, grounding, and Marcus felt his initial defensive anger begin to subside. Normal? Marcus asked quietly. Sarah, what's normal about any of this? Normal is coming home from war in one piece, with your mind intact and your family waiting. Normal is the VA processing your claim in a reasonable time frame instead of jerking you around for 18 months. Normal is being able to hold a job without having panic attacks when a truck backfires. Sarah's expression softened, and for a moment she looked like the little girl who used to crawl into his lap when thunderstorms frightened her. Dad, I know it's been hard. I know we haven't been there for you the way we should have. But this isn't the answer. Living out here like a hermit with a bull isn't going to fix what's broken. Maybe not, Marcus admitted. But Thunder's helped me more than any doctor or therapist ever did. He gives me purpose, Sarah. He gives me reason to get up in the morning and try to build something worth having. But at what cost? Sarah's voice rose slightly, and Thunder's ears perked up in response to her distress. Dad, you're becoming a local joke. People think you've lost your mind. And frankly, sometimes I wonder if they're right. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. To hear his own daughter voice the doubts that had plagued him in his darkest moments was almost unbearable. Thunder sensed his human's pain immediately, pressing his massive head against Marcus's shoulder in a gesture of comfort that was purely instinctive. I haven't lost my mind, Marcus said quietly. I've found my peace. There's a difference. Peace? Sarah's laugh was bitter. Dad, you're facing eviction. You're being investigated by half the county government, and your disability claim is about to be denied. How is that peace? Because for the first time in 4 years, I'm not afraid, Marcus replied. When I wake up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding and my hands shaking, Thunder's there. When the world feels like it's closing in on me, Thunder gives me space to breathe. When I feel like I've lost everything that matters, Thunder reminds me that some things can't be taken away. Thunder, as if understanding every word, made that low, rumbling sound that Marcus had come to think of as the bull's version of agreement. Sarah watched this interaction with a mixture of wonder and frustration. Dad, I'm a nurse. I see people every day who are struggling with trauma, with PTSD, with all the things you're dealing with, but they get help from professionals, not from farm animals. And how many of them actually get better? Marcus asked. How many of your patients find real peace, real healing from their professional help? Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. In her years as an ICU nurse, she'd seen plenty of veterans cycle through the hospital system, many of them multiple times for issues related to their service. The success stories were few and far between. That's not the point, she said finally. The point is that you're isolating yourself from everyone who cares about you. When's the last time you had dinner with another human being? When's the last time you went to town or called David or had a conversation with someone who doesn't weigh half a ton and eat grass? I talked to Eleanor, Marcus pointed out, and Dr. Martinez stops by regularly to check on Thunder. Frank Chen helped me with the plumbing just last week. Neighbors taking pity on the crazy hermit with the bull, Sarah said. Dad, that's not a social life. That's not a future. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Marcus had been isolated, cut off from the normal rhythms of community life. But he'd also been more content in the past 3 months than he'd been in years. Thunder had given him structure, purpose, and the kind of unconditional acceptance that he'd never found in the human world. Maybe it's not the future you'd choose for me, Marcus said. But it's the one I've chosen for myself. And for the first time since I came back from Afghanistan, I feel like I'm living instead of just surviving." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, then at Thunder, who was watching their conversation with those impossibly intelligent eyes. "Dad, I love you, but I can't watch you throw your life away for a bull." "I'm not throwing my life away," Marcus said. "I'm building a new one." Sarah shook her head and walked back to her car. Before getting in, she turned back one last time. "The VA called me yesterday. They want to schedule a competency hearing. If you don't pass, they'll appoint someone to make decisions for you. Dad, please, find a way to fix this before it's too late." As her Honda disappeared down the gravel road, Marcus felt the weight of isolation settle over him like a heavy blanket. Thunder pressed closer, offering what comfort he could, but even the bull's presence couldn't dispel the growing certainty that Marcus was running out of time, options, and allies. The battle for his independence, his home, and his unlikely companion was about to begin in earnest, and Marcus wasn't sure he had the strength to fight it alone. The revelation came at 3 in the morning on a night when the Texas heat refused to break and Marcus couldn't sleep despite his exhaustion. He'd been reading his grandfather's journal by lamplight, searching for wisdom in the careful handwriting of a man who'd faced his own share of impossible circumstances. Thunder lay beside the bus, his massive form silhouetted against the star-drunk sky, occasionally snorting in his sleep like a giant guard dog. The entry Marcus found was dated October 15, 1967, written in his grandfather's increasingly shaky handwriting. "Young Clayton Whitmore stopped by today asking about work. That boy's been lost since his daddy took his own life last spring. Found Harold hanging in the barn with his VA papers scattered on the floor like confetti from hell. Clayton blames the government, blames the war, blames everyone but the grief that's eating him alive. Told him he could help me with the Henderson barn raising, but he's got too much anger to do clean work. Some folks carry their pain like a poison, spreading it everywhere they go." Marcus read the passage 3 times before the implications fully sank in. Clayton Whitmore, the same Clayton Whitmore who was systematically destroying Marcus's life, had a personal connection to this place, to this family, to the very struggles that Marcus faced daily. The VA bureaucrat's vendetta wasn't professional indifference. It was personal revenge wrapped in official procedure. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Dr. Rebecca Martinez arrived just after sunrise, her veterinary truck kicking up dust as she pulled alongside the bus. But instead of her usual cheerful demeanor, she wore the grave expression of someone bearing bad news. "I need to examine Thunder," she said without preamble. "There have been some concerning reports filed with the State Veterinary Board." Thunder, who always enjoyed Dr. Martinez's visits, approached with his usual gentle curiosity. But as she began her examination, her frown deepened. She spent extra time listening to his heart, checking his eyes, palpating areas around his neck and shoulders. "What kind of reports?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the source. "Anonymous complaints about his behavior, his living conditions, his interaction with humans. The state's requiring a full health and temperament evaluation." She paused in her examination, her stethoscope still pressed to Thunder's massive chest. "Marcus, there's something else. His heart rate is irregular. It's subtle, but it's there." The words hit Marcus like ice water in his veins. "What does that mean?" "It could be nothing. Stress, diet, normal aging, but given his size and breed, we need to do some tests. Brahman bulls can develop cardiac issues, especially when they're under stress." She looked up at Marcus with compassion in her eyes. "The timing of this official scrutiny isn't helping his condition." Thunder, as if sensing the gravity of the conversation, nudged Marcus's hand with his enormous head. The bull's touch was gentle, reassuring, but Marcus could feel the slight irregularity in Thunder's breathing that he'd been unconsciously ignoring for weeks. "How bad could it be?" Marcus asked quietly. "Best case, It's manageable with medication and lifestyle changes. Worst case, Dr. Martinez trailed off, but her expression said everything Marcus didn't want to hear. That afternoon brought the most devastating blow yet. Clayton Whitmore returned, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 animal control officers flanked him, along with a county sheriff's deputy and a woman in a business suit who introduced herself as a court-appointed advocate for animal welfare. "Mr. Thompson," Clayton announced with barely concealed satisfaction, "I have a court order for the immediate removal of the animal in question, multiple violations of county ordinances, plus concerns about the animal's welfare given your unstable living situation." Thunder, who had been grazing peacefully near the bus, lifted his head at the sound of unfamiliar voices. He moved toward Marcus with the protective instincts that had developed over their 4 years together, positioning himself between his human and the group of strangers. "You can't just take him," Marcus said, his voice shaking with a combination of rage and desperation. "He's not violating any laws. He's never hurt anyone." "The law is quite clear about livestock in residential areas," the animal welfare advocate said, in the brisk tone of someone who'd delivered this speech many times before. "Even converted vehicles don't qualify for agricultural exemptions. And frankly, Mr. Thompson, keeping an animal of this size in these conditions constitutes neglect." Neglect? Marcus gestured at Thunder's obvious health, his shining coat, his calm demeanor. "Does that look like neglect to you?" "It looks like an accident waiting to happen," Clayton interjected. "Brahman bulls are inherently dangerous. The fact that this one hasn't hurt anyone yet doesn't mean it won't. We have a responsibility to protect the public." Thunder seemed to sense the threat building around them. The bull moved closer to Marcus, his nostrils flaring as he tested the air for danger signals. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it was unmistakably protective. "See?" Clayton pointed at Thunder's defensive stance. "Threatening behavior. That animal sees us as enemies, which proves how unpredictable he is." "He's protecting me because you're threatening him," Marcus shot back. Any animal would react the same way. The animal control officers began unpacking their equipment: tranquilizer guns, heavy-duty restraints, a trailer large enough to transport a bull Thunder's size. The sight of the preparations sent Thunder into genuine agitation for the first time Marcus had ever witnessed. The bull began pacing in tight circles, making low, rumbling sounds that weren't quite distress calls but clearly indicated his growing anxiety. "Please," Marcus said, his military composure finally cracking. "You don't understand. He's not just an animal to me. He's family. He's the only thing keeping me sane." "That's exactly the problem," Clayton said coldly. "You're emotionally dependent on a dangerous animal instead of seeking proper treatment. This removal is as much for your benefit as it is for public safety." Eleanor Martinez appeared as if summoned by the commotion, her old Ford truck sliding to a stop in a cloud of dust and gravel. She took in the scene: the official vehicles, the tranquilizer guns, Thunder's obvious distress, and her face hardened into an expression that could have stopped a charging locomotive. "What the hell is going on here?" she demanded, striding toward the group with the fearless determination of a woman who'd faced down everything life could throw at her. "Ma'am, this is official business," the deputy began, but Eleanor cut him off with a gesture that would have made a drill sergeant proud. "Don't you ma'am me, Jimmy Rodriguez. I changed your diapers when your mama was working 2 jobs to keep you fed. Official business, my foot. This is harassment, plain and simple." The deputy, who was indeed Jimmy Rodriguez, and who clearly remembered Eleanor's authority from his childhood, looked uncomfortable but held his ground. "Mrs. Martinez, we have a court order. The animal has to be removed." "On whose complaint?" Eleanor demanded. "Because I live closer to Thunder than anyone else, and I never filed any complaints. Neither did Frank Chen or the Hendersons or anyone else in this neighborhood who actually knows this bull." Clayton stepped forward, his pale face flushed with anger at having his authority questioned by an elderly Hispanic woman. The complaints are on file with the appropriate authorities. The source of the complaints is irrelevant. What matters is public safety. Bullshit, Eleanor said bluntly, and Marcus could see several of the officers struggling not to smile. You want to talk about public safety? Let's talk about the time Thunder stopped Jenny Chen from wandering into traffic when her dementia got bad. Or the time he helped my arthritic ass get groceries out of my truck. Or the 100 other times he's proven he's got more sense and compassion than most humans I know. Thunder, as if responding to Eleanor's defense, approached her with his head lowered in a gesture of respect and affection. She reached up to scratch behind his ears, and the massive bull relaxed visibly at her touch. Mrs. Martinez, the animal welfare advocate said patiently, I understand your emotional attachment, but the law doesn't make exceptions based on individual circumstances. This animal needs to be relocated to an appropriate facility where it can receive proper care. Proper care? Eleanor's voice rose to a pitch that could have shattered glass. Look at him. Look at his condition, his temperament, his obvious health and happiness. If this is improper care, then I'd hate to see what you people consider proper. The confrontation might have continued indefinitely, but Thunder suddenly stiffened and turned toward Marcus with an expression of urgent concern. The bull moved quickly to his human side, just as Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that preceded his worst episodes. The stress of the situation, combined with the threat to Thunder and the knowledge of the bull's possible heart condition, triggered a panic attack more severe than any Marcus had experienced in months. His breathing became rapid and shallow. His hands began to shake uncontrollably, and the world around him started to narrow into a tunnel of overwhelming anxiety. Thunder's response was immediate and instinctive. The bull positioned himself to block Marcus from the view of the strangers, creating a bubble of privacy and security. Then Thunder began that low, rumbling sound that Marcus had learned to associate with comfort and safety, the sound that never failed to calm his racing heart and quiet his chaotic thoughts. The effect was remarkable and immediate. Within minutes, Marcus's breathing began to slow, his hands steadied, and the crushing weight of panic began to lift from his chest. Thunder maintained his protective stance throughout, a living barrier between Marcus and the world that seemed determined to tear them apart. The assembled officials watched this interaction with varying degrees of amazement and discomfort. Even Clayton seemed momentarily taken aback by the obvious therapeutic relationship between man and bull. "Did you see that?" Eleanor asked quietly, her voice carrying the authority of a medical professional. "That bull just stopped a severe panic attack better than any medication could have. You want to talk about therapy animals? You're looking at one." Dr. Martinez, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke up. "From a medical standpoint, what I just witnessed is extraordinary. Thunder demonstrated both the ability to predict Mr. Thompson's medical episode and the knowledge of how to effectively intervene. This isn't just pet ownership, this is a genuine therapeutic relationship." Clayton's face flushed darker. "It's an unhealthy dependency that prevents the patient from seeking proper treatment. Removing the animal will force Mr. Thompson to develop appropriate coping mechanisms. Or it might kill him," Dr. Martinez said bluntly. "Separating bonded partners, whether human or animal, can cause severe psychological trauma. Given Mr. Thompson's PTSD and Thunder's apparent role in managing his symptoms, forced separation could trigger a complete psychological breakdown." The standoff continued for another hour, with both sides marshaling arguments and authorities. But Marcus knew it was a losing battle. Clayton had the law on his side, and personal vendettas wrapped in official procedure were nearly impossible to fight. As the sun began to set over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful under different circumstances, Marcus watched the animal control officers prepare their equipment for Thunder's capture. The bull seemed to understand what was happening. He stayed close to Marcus, occasionally looking at the strangers with an expression that seemed almost human in its sadness and confusion. "I'm sorry, boy," Marcus whispered, burying his face in Thunder's neck. "I tried to protect you, but I wasn't strong enough." Thunder rumbled softly in response, the sound carrying all the love and loyalty that had defined their 4 years together. The battle was lost, but the war was far from over. The truth came tumbling out of Clayton Whitmore like water through a broken dam, triggered by the sight of Thunder refusing to board the transport trailer despite the tranquilizer coursing through his massive system. The bull had managed to position himself in the doorway of the bus, his bulk effectively blocking the entrance while he gazed at Marcus with eyes that seemed to hold all the sorrow in the world. "Just get him in the damn trailer," Clayton snapped at the animal control officers, his professional composure finally cracking after 3 hours of failed attempts to move the drugged but determined bull. "Sir, we can't force him without risking injury to personnel," one of the officers replied nervously. "He's not being aggressive, but he's using passive resistance. We've never seen anything like it." Thunder wasn't fighting the tranquilizer. He was enduring it. His movements were slow and deliberate, his massive head swaying slightly from the drugs, but his resolve remained unshakable. He would not abandon Marcus no matter what chemicals they pumped into his system. The bull's front hooves were planted firmly on the threshold of the bus, his hindquarters outside, creating a living barricade that no amount of bureaucratic authority could move. "This is ridiculous," Clayton muttered, pulling out his cell phone. "I'm calling for additional personnel." "Mr. Whitmore," Eleanor Martinez said quietly, stepping closer to the increasingly agitated VA official. "Why is this so important to you? What did Marcus and Thunder ever do to make you hate them this much?" "I don't hate them," Clayton replied automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm doing my job. Public safety requires—" "Bullshit," Eleanor interrupted, using her favorite word with surgical precision. "I've lived in this county for 73 years, and I've never seen a government official work this hard to destroy someone's life. This is personal." Clayton's pale face flushed red, and for a moment Marcus thought the man might actually strike the elderly woman. Instead, Clayton began to pace back and forth like a caged animal, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You want to know why this is personal?" Clayton's voice rose to a near shout. "Because 43 years ago, my father hung himself in his garage with a VA claim denial letter in his pocket. Because Harold Whitmore served 2 tours in Vietnam, came home with nightmares and shaking hands, and a drinking problem that got worse every year. Because he applied for disability benefits and got jerked around for 3 years by bureaucrats who didn't give a damn about his service or his sacrifice." The assembled officials shifted uncomfortably as Clayton's professional mask finally slipped completely away, revealing the wounded 8-year-old boy who had never properly grieved his father's suicide. "My father had a bull, too," Clayton continued, his voice breaking. "A big black Brahmin named Thunder. Yeah, same damn name. That bull was the only thing that kept Dad calm during his worst episodes. But when the money ran out and we had to sell the farm, Thunder went to the slaughterhouse. Dad lasted exactly 6 weeks after that." Eleanor's expression softened from anger to compassion as she began to understand the twisted psychology driving Clayton's vendetta. "Oh, honey," she said gently, "that wasn't your daddy's fault, and it sure wasn't Thunder's fault. Wasn't it?" Clayton's laugh was bitter and broken. "If my father had been strong enough to survive without an animal crutch, maybe he'd still be alive. If he'd learned to deal with his problems like a man instead of depending on a stupid cow, maybe I wouldn't have grown up in foster care after child services took me away from his corpse. Marcus, who had been listening to this revelation with growing understanding and unexpected sympathy, stepped closer to Clayton despite Thunder's protective positioning. "Your father wasn't weak," he said quietly. "He was wounded. There's a difference." "Is there?" Clayton's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Because from where I sit, you look exactly like him, living in isolation, depending on an animal instead of getting real help, making excuses for why the system doesn't work instead of working within it. And when Thunder dies or gets taken away, what then? How long before you follow my father's example?" The question hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or dispel. Thunder, despite the tranquilizer affecting his coordination, managed to turn his massive head toward Marcus with an expression of such profound concern that several of the officials looked away in discomfort. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who had been quietly observing the emotional breakdown, stepped forward with the calm authority of someone accustomed to dealing with crisis situations. "Mr. Whitmore, I understand your pain and I'm sorry for what happened to your father. But punishing Marcus won't bring your dad back, and it won't heal the wound you've been carrying for 4 decades. "I'm not punishing anyone," Clayton said weakly. "I'm enforcing regulations that exist for good reasons." "You're perpetuating a cycle of trauma," Dr. Martinez replied firmly. "Your father needed help and didn't get it, so now you're ensuring that other veterans don't get help either. How does that honor his memory?" Before Clayton could respond, a new voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "Daddy?" Everyone turned to see a young woman approaching from a small sedan that had apparently arrived during the confrontation. She was in her mid-20s, with Clayton's pale complexion but softer features, and she moved with the careful gait of someone managing chronic pain. "Jessica?" Clayton's voice dropped to a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Mom saw the news story online," Jessica replied, referring to the social media coverage that had been building around Marcus and Thunder's situation. "She was worried about you. Said you'd been working too many late nights, taking too many cases personally." Jessica's gaze swept over the scene, the tranquilized bull blocking the bus door, the array of official vehicles, her father's obvious emotional distress, and her expression shifted from concern to understanding. "Oh, Daddy," she said sadly. "This is about Grandpa Harold, isn't it?" Clayton's composure crumbled entirely. The tears he'd been fighting for nearly an hour finally broke free, and he sank to his knees in the Texas dirt like a man whose strings had been cut. "I can't lose another one, Jess. I can't watch another veteran choose an animal over real help." Jessica knelt beside her father, wrapping her arms around him with the practiced ease of someone who'd been providing comfort for years. "Daddy, look at him. Really look at that bull. Does he look like he's hurting anyone?" Through his tears, Clayton looked at Thunder, really looked at him for the first time. The bull was still positioned in the doorway, but his posture wasn't threatening. He was tired from the tranquilizer, worried about Marcus, and confused by all the strangers, but there wasn't an ounce of aggression in his massive frame. "That's not Grandpa's Thunder," Jessica said gently. "And this isn't Grandpa. This is a different man with a different bull in a different time. You can't save Grandpa Harold by destroying Mr. Thompson." Eleanor Martinez, who had been watching this family drama unfold with the sharp eyes of a woman who'd seen every variety of human pain over 7 decades, made a decision. She walked to her truck, retrieved something from the glove compartment, and returned with a faded photograph. "Clayton," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I want you to look at something." The photograph showed a younger Earl Thompson standing beside a dark-colored Brahman bull, both man and animal, squinting into bright sunlight. The date written on the back was 1967. "That's Marcus's grandfather and your father's Thunder," Eleanor explained. "Earl gave your daddy work after your granddaddy died, tried to help him get back on his feet. Thunder wasn't put down, honey. He lived on this property for another 15 years. Your daddy gave him to Earl when things got bad, because he wanted the bull to have a good life, even if he couldn't." Clayton stared at the photograph as if it contained the secrets of the universe. "But Dad said—" "Your daddy said a lot of things when the pain got too bad," Eleanor replied with infinite gentleness. "But the truth is, he loved you enough to make sure Thunder was safe before he made his final decision. That bull died of old age in 1982, surrounded by people who loved him." The revelation shattered the foundation of resentment that had driven Clayton's vendetta. His father hadn't been weak, and Thunder hadn't been abandoned to slaughter. Harold Whitmore had made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure his son's future, even if that future had been shaped by grief and misunderstanding. Dr. Martinez seized the moment of emotional breakthrough to address the practical situation. "Mr. Whitmore, given what we've learned today, I think it's clear that separating Marcus and Thunder would cause significant psychological harm to both man and animal. From a medical standpoint, I'm recommending that Thunder be officially designated as an emotional support animal under Texas state law." "But the regulations," Clayton began weakly. "Can be waived for medical necessity," Jessica interrupted, her voice carrying the authority of someone familiar with bureaucratic processes. "I'm a paralegal, Daddy. I know how these systems work. You have the discretionary power to approve an exception based on documented medical need." Thunder, as if sensing that the immediate threat had passed, finally allowed himself to collapse fully to the ground, the tranquilizer claiming victory over his determination to protect Marcus. But even lying down, he kept his massive head turned toward his human, maintaining vigilant watch despite his exhaustion. Marcus knelt beside Thunder, running his hands over the bull's neck and shoulders, checking for any signs of distress from the drugs. "It's okay, boy," he whispered. "I think we're going to be okay." Clayton Whitmore looked around at the faces surrounding him. His daughter's compassion, Eleanor's forgiveness, Dr. Martinez's professional concern, and Marcus's unexpected empathy. For the first time in 43 years, he felt the weight of his father's ghost beginning to lift from his shoulders. "I'll need to file a report," he said finally, his voice hoarse from crying. "But I think we can work something out." As the sun set over the Texas landscape, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the small group of people began the process of untangling 4 decades of misunderstood grief and misdirected anger. Thunder dozed fitfully in the gathering dusk, his breathing steady and strong, while Marcus maintained his vigil beside the bull who had saved his life in more ways than anyone could count. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, victory seemed possible. 6 months later, Marcus Thompson stood in the doorway of what had once been a rusted school bus and now resembled something from a home design magazine. The transformation was complete. Gleaming hardwood floors, custom cabinetry that would have made his grandfather proud, and windows that caught the morning light and scattered it like gold coins across the polished surfaces. Thunder lay in his specially designed alcove, a space that accommodated his massive frame while keeping him close to the man who had become the center of his universe. The changes went far beyond mere aesthetics. The bus had become a symbol of something larger, a testament to the power of determination and unconventional love. Visitors came regularly now, veterans seeking their own paths to healing, families dealing with PTSD, journalists documenting the unlikely partnership between a broken soldier and a gentle giant. Thunder had become something of a celebrity, featured in magazine articles and news segments about innovative approaches to therapy and emotional support. Dr. Rebecca Martinez had been instrumental in Thunder's official certification as an emotional support animal, the first Brahman bull in Texas to receive such designation. The paperwork had required months of documentation, veterinary assessments, and behavioral evaluations, but Clayton Whitmore had expedited every step of the process with the zeal of a convert seeking redemption. Clayton himself had become an unexpected ally and, eventually, something approaching a friend. His transformation from adversary to advocate had been gradual but complete. He'd begun visiting regularly, bringing his daughter Jessica and sometimes his ex-wife, sharing stories about his father and slowly healing wounds that had festered for decades. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Harold Whitmore's son had found peace in the same place where Harold's bull had lived out his days in contentment. "You ready for the big day?" Eleanor Martinez asked, emerging from her truck with her usual armload of homemade food. At 74, she moved more slowly than she had 6 months ago, but her spirit remained indomitable. She'd appointed herself as Marcus and Thunder's unofficial guardian, a role she embraced with fierce dedication. Today was indeed a big day. Sarah Thompson was getting married on the property, surrounded by the community that had formed around Marcus and Thunder's unlikely story. The guest list included neighbors who had once feared the bull, VA officials who had learned to see beyond bureaucratic procedures, and veterans from 3 different wars who had found hope in the example of a man who'd refused to give up on healing. Thunder himself was to play a special role in the ceremony, having been designated as Sarah's best bull in lieu of a traditional best man. He wore a custom-made bow tie that Dr. Martinez had designed, and his coat had been brushed until it gleamed like polished obsidian. The bull seemed to understand the significance of the day, carrying himself with extra dignity as wedding guests began to arrive. Sarah emerged from the bus in her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation that caught the Texas sun and made her look like something from a fairy tale. The transformation in her relationship with her father had been as dramatic as any other aspect of the past 6 months. She'd come to understand that Thunder wasn't competition for her father's affection. He was the key that had unlocked Marcus's ability to love again. "Daddy," she said, taking Marcus's arm, "I owe you an apology. And I owe Thunder one, too." Thunder, as if understanding that he was being discussed, approached with his characteristic gentle dignity. Sarah reached out to scratch behind his ears, a gesture that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. "I was so focused on what I thought normal should look like that I missed what healing actually looks like," she continued. "Thunder didn't take you away from us. He brought you back to us." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes as he watched his daughter embrace the bull who had saved his life. "Thunder just reminded me who I used to be," he said quietly. "Or maybe he helped me become who I was supposed to be all along." David arrived with his wife and their 2 young children, who immediately gravitated toward Thunder with the fearless enthusiasm that only children possess. The bull tolerated their attention with saintly patience, allowing them to pet his nose and feed him apple slices while their parents watched in amazement. "I can't believe I was afraid of him," David admitted to his father. "Look at him with the kids. He's like a giant dog." "Better than most dogs," Marcus replied, watching Thunder carefully position himself so the children could climb on his back safely. "Dogs are loyal, but Thunder's got wisdom." Linda Thompson arrived as the sun reached its zenith, looking nervous but determined. The divorce had been final for 2 years, but she'd requested permission to attend Sarah's wedding, despite the awkwardness it might create. She emerged from her car wearing a simple blue dress and an expression of cautious hope. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Linda," Marcus replied, surprised by how little pain her presence caused. "I'm glad you came. Sarah wanted you here." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Thunder interact with the growing crowd of wedding guests. The bull had become the unofficial greeter, approaching each new arrival with gentle curiosity and somehow managing to put even the most nervous visitors at ease. "I was wrong," Linda said finally. "About Thunder, about what he meant to you. I thought he was a symptom of your problems, but he was actually the cure, wasn't he?" "He was the bridge," Marcus corrected. "The bridge between who I was before the war and who I could be after it. I couldn't cross that bridge alone, but Thunder helped me find the way." The wedding ceremony itself was unlike anything the small community had ever witnessed. The officiant, a retired Army chaplain who understood the unique bonds forged in combat and its aftermath, incorporated Thunder into the proceedings with dignity and grace. The bull stood perfectly still during the vows, his presence lending a sense of groundedness and authenticity to the proceedings. When Sarah and her new husband exchanged rings, Thunder made that low rumbling sound that Marcus had come to recognize as his expression of contentment. Several guests wiped their eyes, moved by the obvious emotion of the massive animal who had become such an integral part of this unlikely family's story. The reception took place under a pavilion that the community had erected specifically for the occasion. Tables groaned under the weight of potluck contributions, and a small band played country music while couples danced on a makeshift dance floor. Thunder positioned himself at the edge of the festivities, close enough to keep watch over the proceedings, but far enough away to avoid accidentally stepping on any toes. Clayton Whitmore approached Marcus during a quiet moment, carrying 2 bottles of beer and wearing an expression of thoughtful contemplation. "I've been thinking about what you said 6 months ago," Clayton began, offering Marcus one of the beers. "About your grandfather's journal and building things with your own hands. I think maybe it's time I started building something instead of just tearing things down." "What did you have in mind?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the transformation in the man who had once been his greatest enemy. "A program," Clayton replied. "Something that connects veterans with rescue animals, provides training and support for alternative therapy approaches. The VA's got funding for innovative programs, and after what I've seen here," he gestured toward Thunder, who was currently allowing 3 children to use him as a living jungle gym. "I think we might be onto something revolutionary." Marcus smiled, thinking about his grandfather's words about giving every piece of wood a new voice. "I think Thunder would approve of that plan." As the evening progressed and the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Marcus found himself standing once again in the doorway of his transformed home. The bus that had once been a symbol of his desperation had become a beacon of hope, not just for him, but for everyone who encountered his story. Thunder approached, having extricated himself from the children's attention, and settled beside Marcus with a contented sigh. The bull's presence was as comforting as ever, but the desperate need that had once characterized their relationship had evolved into something deeper and more sustainable. "We did good, boy," Marcus said, running his hand over Thunder's broad forehead. "We built something worth having." Thunder's response was that familiar rumble of agreement, a sound that had become the soundtrack of Marcus's healing. Around them, the wedding celebration continued into the night, filled with laughter and music and the kind of joy that only comes from genuine community. Eleanor Martinez approached with a plate of cake and a satisfied smile. "You know what this reminds me of?" she asked, gesturing at the scene around them. "What's that?" Marcus replied. "That old saying about how the best revenge is living well," Eleanor said. "But I think maybe the best healing is loving well. And honey, you and Thunder have loved each other well enough to heal a whole community." As the stars emerged in the Texas sky and the celebration began to wind down, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The road from despair to hope had been neither straight nor easy, but it had been traveled with the best possible companion. Thunder would always be more than just an animal. He was family, therapist, and guardian angel wrapped in 1,200 pounds of gentle strength. Together, they had proven that healing comes in many forms. Love transcends species, and sometimes the most unlikely partnerships produce the most extraordinary results. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and unmarked by the ghosts that had once haunted Marcus's every step. And through it all, Thunder would be there, steady, loyal, and endlessly loving. Message for American seniors. Friends, imagine losing everything that once defined you, your career, your home, your sense of purpose, and finding yourself at rock bottom with only an unlikely companion by your side. Marcus Thompson's journey with Thunder reminds us that healing doesn't always come in the packages we expect. Sometimes it comes with 4 legs, a gentle heart, and unwavering loyalty. At 52, Marcus discovered that starting over isn't about returning to who you were, but becoming who you're meant to be. His story proves that it's never too late to build something beautiful from the wreckage, to find family in unexpected places, and to discover that love truly has no boundaries. Whether it's a grandchild who sees the world differently, a neighbor who needs help, or even a gentle giant who becomes your anchor, connection and purpose can transform any life. What unexpected friendship has changed your perspective on healing or happiness? Have you ever found comfort in a relationship others didn't understand? Share your story below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.